do you have any interesting stories about what you went through during the culture war? Because as you know, we kind of agreed to, you did have a bit of a huge bullseye on you, given that you were by that point 5 years in to actively engaging in advocacy for men and boys.
Well, I was probably terminated on account of it.
This is another clip from my recent conversation with Justin Trottier, founder and former head of Canada's largest atheist organization, and then founder and current head of Canada's two most prolific men and boys issues advocacy organizations. In this video, Justin and I talk about a feminism and social justice related culture war within the atheist community that would tear this energetic and growing movement apart. We discuss how each of us experienced it from the inside and how it cost Justin his job. This same culture war would then engulf societies across the Western world in the years to come and persists to this day. There will be more clips to come and the release of the full interview in under a week. So subscribe if you don't want to miss any of the conversation. Atheist movement, one of the things that I love talking to you about is the culture war. So, you know, our whole culture has been in this big social justice oriented culture war since around 2015 is when it really ramped up during the Trump presidential campaign. Maybe a little before that, like it had been building. And I think come like 2015, 16, 17, like a lot of people, they were just flabbergasted by what they were seeing. Whereas people like you and like me, like to us, this was just reruns. Like this is exactly like to a T what happened in the atheist community starting in late 2012 and continuing on for the next few years. Like this atheist movement, as you were saying earlier, like just the Canadian organization was popping up chapters over like dozens of them across the country. They were well attended. You know, when we ran events at or near U of T, they would often have hundreds of people at them. Like this movement was booming. It was bustling. It was huge. And then feminism became an issue and related social justice concepts in late 2012. And the movement was utterly fractured. It was like a war for a while in there, and it has never recovered. And I feel like one person that didn't get as much attention as on paper I would have thought would have was you. Because you had, and I remember this, when I was working with you a lot at the U of T Secular Alliance and everything, you started this one of your many little side projects. You know, first there was astronomy, and then there was you created, I think it was equalityactivism.ca or something you called your website, or
my blog, yes. Yeah.
Right. It was a blog, and you made podcasts about issues for men and boys. And when you first did it, I was just like, huh. Okay. Like, you know, I was like, I didn't see it coming. I didn't really care. I was just like kind of curious, if anything. And then I read your blog a little and I listened to some of your podcasting and I'm like, oh yeah, makes a lot of sense. And to me, I was like, that's the end of it. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Justin's got this cool other project that I never heard of. But once I thought about it for like 8 seconds, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And for me, that was the end of it. But it wasn't the end of it for a lot of people. And so
it was the beginning. No, and I'm glad you painted the chronology, because I had never thought about quite where my work kind of positioned itself with the other things, the bigger things that were brewing. But yeah, if you look at the date, so I was getting involved in some of this activism with the blog and the podcast, etc. And it was really actually in the years just before the big blow up, 2014, 2015, and talking about things that would become right at the core of the splintering, factionalism that you're describing.
So then in late 2012, feminism becomes this big thing in the atheist movement. And here you are, this straight, white, male head of the national organization who has been engaging in men's rights activism for 5 years. Like you must have had, just like your whole body must have been one big bullseye.
Yeah, I would say so. And I guess I came at it pretty naively. I had imagined that just as all of us in the atheist movement were drawn to that underdog cause, atheism, we would all, not all of us, I mean, I wasn't that naive, but that there would be enough of a stomach to look at other underdog causes, like to at least give it a serious consideration, right? So when I started agitating about men's issues and saying, maybe men don't have all the power in the way we historically think that they do, I thought people would at least like be reasonable and offer reasoned critiques instead of just blowing up in response the way they did with knee-jerk reactions and such. The blog originally, I forget exactly what its tagline was, but it tried to tie together all the things I was interested in. So atheism, skepticism, and men's issues under that theme of let's talk about things that are provocative, but that are substantial issues, life and death issues, that mostly other people are not talking about. And let's find out why, there isn't an appetite for these things, and can the dialogue be opened up in the best interest of making social progress happen? Like, I was seeing it as a progressive initiative, well within the mandate of CFI and humanism and skepticism. I was obviously in the minority. Having said that, it wasn't a small minority. I mean, I ended up pulling quite an audience in support of what I was doing, and a lot of those people, they actually came with me. So when I left CFI and I founded these other groups, there was a healthy contribution from former volunteers and personnel from CFI that sort of thought the way I did and wanted to get involved in this new project with me. But it was still a minority. Like, certainly the rank and file had a different response. Some of them were very vitriolic. Some of them just thought it was probably inappropriate that I was trying to mix these things together, and I should have just kind of kept them as far apart as I possibly could.
Gotcha. Well, I remember, I went through, so there's the whole atheist culture war, and it's happening at the big scale, but also at the small scale. So it's happening at the big scale in the sense that you're seeing the big atheist blogs like going off on each other. You're seeing like popular figures like Dawkins and Harris either being praised or being pilloried by their own community, depending on which person it was, and then it tore apart some atheist smaller community groups, like the one that I was in Kelowna, British Columbia. It was just a perfect microcosm of what was happening in the Canada, US, international Western atheist movements. And I remember, like, when it first started, like I was an ardent progressive. I watched the Young Turks every single day. If you asked me, I would have told you I was a feminist. And I remember one time in the atheist movement, before I realized how bad things had gotten, another guy in the movement said that he believed in equality, but he's not a feminist. I'm like, well, that is a feminist. That's where I was. But then what I would find is, so I thought I was on the side of the feminists in our group. But every once in a while, if I questioned something, or if I said, what about this? And it called into question one of their beliefs, they would just tear my head off and make the worst assumptions about me. Like this is all just window dressing to hide my misogyny or things like, you know what I mean? Like they're just, they're assuming malicious motivations on my part that I'm couching in academic terms maybe or something. And I just felt like, if I can just speak to them more and be really reasonable and clarify all their misconceptions about that they're having about me, we can work through this. And it didn't work. Like, it didn't matter how many times I tried, how many clarifications I made. It's just like they were determined to be mad at me. But I was going to bring it back a little. So obviously, you've worked with Karen Strawn. Girl writes what? Man, I miss her. She is one of the most brilliant minds I have ever come across. If anyone hasn't heard of her, just look on YouTube. Girl writes what? Karen Strawn. She's fantastic. I remember I didn't watch this video until it'd probably been out for close to a year by the time I watched it for the first time. When the atheist feminism culture war was happening, she was starting to get more and more views from atheists who were finding her on YouTube. And so she made a video directed specifically at the atheists coming to her videos because of the culture war happening in their movement. And I believe the title was something like, Atheism, You Asked for It. And the argument she made, you might recall, was that the mistake that the atheist community made was by putting so much emphasis on the negative consequences of religion. So things like, oh, like, like it encourages misogyny, it encourages war, things like that. And the way she put it was, even if she herself's an atheist, and even if she said, if we found out tomorrow that, like, being a religious believer actually makes you a better person, a happier person, it makes the world a better place, like things like that, she would still be an atheist. And even if she found out that, like, atheism made made things bad, she would still be an atheist, because she's not an atheist because of the consequences. She's an atheist because to her, that's the most sensible position.
Right.
And
right.
she's saying, when the atheist movement, when we were just about rationalism, it's like, if you were there, you were pretty much like, you had a good idea of Jim's here, Crystal's here, and I'm here. We all roughly know why we're here, because we think religion is irrational and irrationality is harmful. And so we're organizing against irrationality. But when a bunch of your people start coming in, not because they have like rationalist inclinations, but just simply because maybe they're mad at religion, they think it's deleterious socially, well, that can work for a while. But then when, like, a cultural issue comes, like, it can shift what's relevant, and then there can be a massive bifurcation, because, like, when the circumstances change, if you're motivated by a different reason, then you might not want to proceed in the same direction.